that now, and it'll be available on the RDA website by the end of the day. So yeah, Lisa's going to talk us through the relationship between RDA Tiger and EOSC, and then we'll hand over to the working groups. There's 4 working groups presenting today. Lindsay is going to present on behalf of the Metadata Standards Integration Working Group. Gerhard on behalf of the Harmonised Technologies and Schemas for Fair Data in Materials Science and Related Domains Working Group. Sarah on behalf of the Wind Energy Community Standards Working Group, and Sveinung on behalf of the FAIRification of Genomic Annotations Working Group. Then there will be a Q&A session, and we'll provide you with some more information about the remainder of the cross-fertilisation series at the end of the session. And yet, the webinar will be recorded and I'll upload it to the RDA website later today. So over to Lisa.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Genevieve, and welcome everybody from my side as well to this second cross-fertilisation webinar about metadata standards. Before we get going with the groups, I wanted to give you a bit of context why we invited exactly these groups. This webinar is coming out of the RDA TIGER project, or the Research Data Alliance Facilitation of Targeted International Working Groups for EOSC-related Research Solutions project. And RDA TIGER is supporting RDA working groups in various ways, with in-kind support, by engaging external experts for the groups, by providing cascading grants, both for the groups, but also for other organizations who wish to adopt or test RDA outputs, and by developing an RDA maintenance platform. And RDA TIGER is very much located within European and global initiatives around fair enabling policies, technologies, methodologies, practices, and aims to, at the European level, support the development of EOSC, or feed into the development of EOSC, or the European Open Science Cloud. And to understand a bit better how we perceive TIGER contributing to EOSC, we have been mapping RDA TIGER activities to the EOSC Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, or the SRIA, as it's called. The SRIA, as some or many of you may know, sets out both EOSC implementation challenges, but also a multi-annual roadmap for EOSC. And those are the things we have been looking at to understand how RDA TIGER and its supported working groups really contribute to EOSC. Today's presentation around metadata standards feed into the SRIA multi-annual roadmaps objective 2, which is to enable the definition of standards and the development of tools and services to allow research to find, access, reuse, and combine results. And if you're so inclined to go into this area and look up what EOSC would like to see as expected outcomes around this objective, both for the period of 2023-24 as well as for the period of 2025 to 27, you will see that there's a lot of emphasis on the development, adoption, and evaluation of metadata standards, particularly at community level, so disciplinary communities developing their standards, and then harmonizing standards. And we feel that what you will hear today shows how these 4 RDA working groups are working towards delivering exactly this type of output, and through their work then contributing both to the building of EOS, but also at more global international level contribute to greater fairness and greater interoperability of data. Today's intended outcome is first and foremost knowledge sharing, but we will, as RDA Europe, also put together a white paper by the end of the year, the first draft of it, on the alignment of Tiger-supported working groups with EOS. So you will be able to look into it more in depth through our white paper, and today's webinar will contribute to that. But I don't want to bore you anymore with this, and I'm sure you want to much rather hear from the working groups. So today, as Genevieve said, we have 4 working groups present their activities around metadata or data standards. And you see them here, and we go in this order. Each working group will have about 7 minutes to present. We will keep questions to the end. So we'll go one after another. So keep your questions, have them ready when we finish. And now, without further ado, I'll pass it on to Lindsay to talk to us about the multi-omic metadata standards integration working group. Lindsay, here you go.
Hello, I'm Lindsay. Nice to meet everyone virtually. Full disclosure, I have stolen a lot of these slides from our plenary talk. So good news is we have this full slide deck available, and I'll point to that later. This is just the quick shortcut to our page if you are interested or want to join. Just so straight up front, you can have that. If we go to the next slide, I'll introduce our working group. So we do have facilitation by Athena, which is priceless, of course, because working groups who are developing many and complex deliverables, this has been absolutely a lifesaver in terms of communication and engagement. So I have myself as a co-chair, David Mollick, both of us are located in the US. And then we have Tim from Ghent University in Belgium. And so this is our main working group co-chairs right now. If we go to the next slide. I will try to go quickly. So those who are not familiar with omics data, multi-omics integration involves many different domain high throughput technologies. So in this particular group, we're focused on technologies using sequencing or mass spectrometry. So from the workflow chart to the right, you'll see kind of how that feeds down into the core genomics, proteomics, metabolomics domains that we are really working with. And so here, the big challenge is there's a lot of fragmented metadata. Metadata is one of the biggest currencies in reuse and interoperability. And so for us, that is a heavy focus. And one of the main challenges is how many fragmented standards there are along the data lifecycle and how many fragmented data formats there are, even before you get to integration. And so our working group is heavily focused on curating and sort of elevating the standards that exist within these domains that have been around for more than 20 years each, and then highlighting where there may be gaps for integration. So that seems to be a huge challenge across the board. No matter where you come from in multi-omics, there is a large complexity with the domain knowledge there. So to the right in the red box are the first 2 deliverables we've been working on. So the first one was a very large landscape review, feeding into a collection we have for fair sharing that I'll briefly go over. And so we are preparing in the next calendar year to begin our deliverable 3. So for those who are interested, you can kind of get caught up on where we are and still be involved and share your voice and thoughts and opinions in our working group if you are interested to join. Next slide. So one of the main collaborations, I am an omics champion curator for fair sharing as well. So we do partner with that working group as well as many others in some of the standards that we collect and some of the interoperability platforms that we use. So if you're not familiar with fair sharing standards or just standards in general, you can use that QR code on the left to kind of get an overview of the 4 types of standards that we are curating. So we have reporting guidelines, we have models and formats, terminologies, and identifier schemas. So for those who either are or aren't familiar with what that would look like with sequencing and mass spectrometry type technologies, to the right, you'll see an example of each one of those. And these are very hard requirements for those who are domain experts in the field. Next slide. So our first task was to break out into these core groups. Our landscape review, if you join our working group, you'll have access to this. So FYI, right now it's kind of closed down for some of the developments we're doing. But this gives you a good idea of what each one of those would look like within a domain. So we have things where we are only collecting those 4 types of deliverables. We collect the status, the country, how that breaks down into the domain class and subclasses. And then, of course, we have a large listing of all of these ones. And so this was to not reinvent the wheel. We're not creating new standards, but really bringing to the forefront what exists and representing the experts across these domains that don't typically sit in a room and discuss these things all into one location. Next slide. So if you're curious a little bit in the landscape review, we will outline what all the different multi-omics and omics domain classes that we're working with and different terminologies, of course, and pointing to those sources. So this is just a quick excerpt. You can get all these things explained if you filter through our landscape. Next slide. And so this is just a quick overview. There are a ton of standards across the different omics domains. So this gives you a brief snapshot of what we've curated so far. And so this really gives you a good idea of which specific communities are developing a lot of what type of standard. And this is really helpful in terms of just seeing how our curations are captured over time. Next slide. And so one unique component about our landscape review, which we have Tiger support for right now, to make sure that we can kind of sustain a lot of the work that we've done, is we will have a dashboard that will cover the life cycle. So we've really focused in using kind of the RDM kit outline and where these different standards fall along the life cycle, which is very complex in terms of the experts themselves. And so this allows us to sort of elevate the knowledge that we're preparing to share with non-experts, but at an expert level. Next slide. So here's just a really quick example of that. So with each row that you see in our landscape review, we identify where standards fall along that process. So this was actually a very unique asset to the group. It was actually very challenging to fill out, but it will be really great for helping service support for experts as well. Next slide. Moving forward, working with communities who are doing a lot of FAIR assessment. One thing moving from our landscape to the collection, which you'll see in just a second, these are some of the ways we're thinking about how we can assign FAIR metrics potentially to some of the standards we have in our collection. And so that's something we can discuss later if anyone is interested. Next slide. Try to go quick. Last but not least, this was one of our most recent ones. We did a demo release. Thank you to Alison Listo, I think is on the call, helped with getting all these boosted. So from our landscape review, we've populated these into a collection, which you can go to with a QR code, and sort of thinking about how do we help multi-omics researchers care about FAIR, and how do we help them implement that? Next slide. So if you're curious, we have a very scoped and sequenced set of deliverables where sustainability is really at the forefront of what we're providing. So at this collection, one of the assets that this has is that you can build connections across these standards. So our next set of deliverables will really be looking into all these standards. How exactly are they related? Do they collect, profile each other, implement? So this is one of those sustainability deliverables that we have. Next slide. And so moving forward, we have a little bit of Tiger support. So that was really great having Athena help us with that. Applications are under review right now if you're curious about that. A few next steps in collaborating with some FAIR recommendations associated with our collection and how to look at that and assess it. Upcoming deliverables, of course, spanning from a few of the collections you saw. And then we have a couple of publications in process. And if you have any questions, our contacts are on the next slide, I believe, and then I will kick this off to the next speaker. Sorry, there was a lot of info really quick.
Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you for being great about the time. So now we turn over to the harmonized terminologies and schemas for FAIR data in material science and related domains working group. And Gerhard?
Yes, hello. Hello, I'm Gerhard Goldbeck. I'm based in the UK and I have two affiliations, my own company that you can see here, and also EMMC, which is an association based in Belgium, the European Materials Modeling Council. I'm one of the co-chairs of this working group together with Zach Trout. He's at NIST in the US, is at Lynch. She's at Birmingham in the UK, Liam McHugh at Cornell, and also she's on the UPAC committees. Masashi Ishii at the NIMS in Japan, and Kwanro Lee, he's at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology. And as has been said before, I mean, we've really been very happy to have had and still have the Tiger support. In fact, also in the setup phase, Ryan O'Connor helped us with setting up the working group and the case statement and so on. And then Athena is supporting us in running the group very efficiently. There's also the link there to join the group, and you're very welcome to do so. And yeah, next slide. So the background, this is the material science field, material science and related domains. So there's quite a lot of interaction, of course, with chemistry, with areas such as nanomaterials, nanosafety as well. So it's quite a big field in itself. There have been some studies in the past on really there being a lack of agreed conceptualization and terminologies. For example, chemistry has IUPAC Gold Book, materials doesn't have anything like that. The domain is relatively poorly covered in terms of terminologies and ontologies, although that there is also a lot of activities in recent years to address that, but also coordinating all of these activities is quite challenging. There's this relatively low FAIR score of many semantic assets. So we had a birds of a feather session at RDA 20, and then from that, this working group arose. So next slide. The objectives of the working group are to collect and review existing vocabularies and terminologies and schema, to propose and verify best practices in terms of FAIR data based on FAIR semantic artifacts, and then identify the need for harmonization of terminologies and schema in material sciences, and demonstrate successful implementation in some use cases. In the next slide, the outputs are this FAIR maturity assessments of the semantic artifacts, which is something we have been, we're pretty advanced on. We're looking at the best practice recommendations. This is really the very much ongoing work. In particular, we're looking at schema, metadata schema. Hence, this is very much also interesting for me to learn more from others about that. What people want is something they can orient towards, something like schema.org or bioschema.org for the materials field. So this is what this new harmonized semantic artifacts could be. Next slide. So this is the overview of how we're working. We've divided the work into 3 streams up until adoption, then another stream after that. And this is where the work is taking place. Next slide. So on the FAIR indicators for semantic artifacts, there's been fantastic work on the FAIR project with 17 recommendations that we have all reviewed and adopted, and also came up with a number of other indicators, especially around certain requirements for formats and standards, and also the need for canonical terminologies for the field. So a bit more specific, field specific. And then we've identified a number of subcategories that are relevant to, for example, metadata in the findability and reusability formats and standards for interoperability and reusability and so on. So this is the outcome of the stream A. And the next slide, we're looking in the stream B now at from the point of view of the data lifecycle, and then what are the FAIR enabling resources for materials practitioners along those life cycles. So it's really to make it more practical, use case oriented. And in the next slide, I mean, one of the examples from that is in one of the initiatives related to, or we were also working with, is in the NFDI initiatives and NFDI MatWork in Germany that have already put some very nice resources together that can be helpful here. And we are also hoping to build on that and bring more of these together in a similar type of practical tool. Next slide. Is what we're doing, looking at what are the FAIR enabling resources, like a minimum materials metadata set that is required, that all can use and are oriented towards, potentially based on an extending schema.org metadata, or at least profiles that have been about what metadata that are already in existence. For example, also from the biofield, like chemical entity and so on, that can be utilized in a materials profile. And then FAIR implementation protocols as a key methodology for practitioners, again, building on some of them that exist in chemistry and nanomaterials. That's it, and thank you so much. Any questions later on, I guess.
Thank you, Gerhard. And we'll move on to our next domain, which is wind energy. And we have Sarah talk about the Wind Energy Community Standards Working Group.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Sarah Barber. I'm from the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences. Created this presentation with my colleague Yuri, who I think's here, maybe not, I'm not sure. We lead this group, which started officially in May. Next slide. You can skip over that. So why did we form this working group? I actually co-lead something called IEA Wind Task 43, which is the International Energy Agency has these international collaborations where it tries to bring together researchers and industry globally. And Task 43 is about digitalization. And so we've done various things. We wrote this paper. I can put the link in the chat in a minute, led by Yuri, where we did a review of knowledge engineering and wind energy, basically. And we reviewed everything that was out there and all the concepts that were important for building AI-based systems. And we came to the conclusion that there wasn't much going on, and the sector is not very well established in this area at all. We also had an RDA grant where we looked at increasing the fairness of data in wind energy, and we took one data set and analysed it with a fair data maturity model, and came to also the conclusion that there were several basic things missing. So we found a need to actually publish existing ontologies and semantic artifacts. So we actually branched the Onto portal into a Techno portal and started publishing everything that we knew or was aware of on there in one place. Next. And then we also, in Task 43, we've been developing new ontologies. So for example, there's no taxonomy for wind energy project lifecycle, which is kind of a really basic thing. And there's no domain ontology at all. So we've been trying to work on different concepts for that. Next slide. And so in this working group, we formed with the goal of creating a FAIR implementation profile, which basically maps all the resources that can enable the FA, I, and the R into a graph. So that's the goal of the group, based on what we did before. Next slide. And so what we're actually doing is that we're completing this review and evaluation of the existing landscape, which is why actually in the chat I asked a question about to Lindsay and about the landscape analysis. We'd be quite interested in sort of formal ways of doing that. And then the idea is that we choose some representative open data sets in wind energy. So that means from different life cycle phases, for data sets from different parts of the wind energy cycle. And then we want to assess them all for fairness, and then identify high potential areas for improving the fairness. And then after that, develop some guidelines for how to actually improve the fairness of data in wind energy in practice. And then we want to create this FIP at the end. Next slide. So just what we've done so far. So we've done a landscape review, mainly around this paper, which I mentioned, which I'll put in the chat when I stop talking. But we saw that there were some things. So there's an initiative called IRP Wind, which has some basic vocabulary suggestions, but actually on analysis, we came to the conclusion that it needs more thought about the conceptual models. Then there's also a few data models from different IEA wind tasks. There's then a number of ontologies published just as like a PDF or an academic article. In the worst case, there was one that wasn't even described it was referenced to, but there was actually no description of it anywhere. So we had to email the authors, and we got it and put it on the Techno portal. And then there's some very rudimentary industry developed semantic artifacts which need to be formalized using some ontology language. Next slide. So I won't bore you with all these data sets, but we had a list of like about 100 data sets with from different life cycle phases, different types of data, published in different places. And we kind of tried to take some cross-section of them. So we've identified about 20 to 30 different data sets now, which are somehow representative of the landscape. Next slide. And then I said before that we were using the FAIR data maturity model, but recently we've become aware of the fact that there's other ways of evaluating the fairness or assessing the fairness. We've only got experience with the first one. So also if anyone has got any inputs or experience with any of the other ones as to why we should or shouldn't use them, we'd be interested to hear. And so what we actually want to do now is actually get all these data sets and then carry out this evaluation and see what happened. Yuri has put the paper I mentioned in the chat. Thank you, Yuri. Next slide. And so what we're also doing is we're trying to increase community participation. So as I said, like in wind energy, we're not very far developed with this whole idea, even what is ontology, why is it important, why do we need common vocabularies? And so we're building up something we call the We Do Wind open innovation ecosystem, where we're trying to get a lot of people together to share data, to use data, to share experiences, to develop information models together. And we're actually in the process of integrating the RDA group into that, where we hopefully they can then, through synergies with different groups, and get more participants and get more knowledge and have a central location where we can bring knowledge together on the topic. Next slide. And so, yeah, about the role of RDA Tiger. So we've had some nice support from RDA Tiger. So they organize the meeting invitations and send out the minutes, but they also help us make connections with other working groups in the wider community, which is obviously really important. Like, we're quite focused on wind energy, and none of us are really knowledge engineering experts or metadata experts. And so sometimes we have trouble also communicating with people from RDA. And so I think it's really useful for us to make these connections, including like coming to this event and making a presentation. But we've also had them carry out some reports for us, doing some research, and then helping us to acquire new members, like actively thinking who could be people who are actually interested in the things we're interested in, or have tools that they want to apply to our problem. So they've done that also quite successfully a number of times. Next slide. So already finished. I've got 50 seconds left according to my timer. Questions?
So thank you so much. And as you see, Sarah has put here also on the RDA platform, you can find all these groups on the RDA platform, where you also see, you can join them if you want, but you can also see information about them, their outputs. So if you go to the RDA website, you'll find all of them there and can get in touch with them there. And now, before we get to the questions, I'll hand over to our last presenter, to Sveinung, who's going to talk about the FAIRification of Genomic Annotations working group.
Yes, thank you. Right. Did something happen with the slides or no? Okay. No, it looks fine. Okay. So basically, this is a working group which is continuation of work that's been done elsewhere, but where we moved to RDA to get a broader reach. What we're trying to do is focusing on a particular type of data in genomics called genomic tracks or genomic annotations. And this is basically information that describes DNA or describes sequences, what's actually happening in different places along a genome. So basic example is genes. Where are the genes? But there's a number of things happening, a number of data that can be positioned along a reference genome. And there's lots of tools in life science that analyzes this both visually and analytically. Next slide, please. So in terms of the research field that we're aiming here, it's a bit split. So there's parts of the research which is called functional genomics or epigenomics, which is historically been mostly human biomedical research, but also other model organisms, where the sort of focus is on comparing data sets. And then there's the other field, which is more biodiversity and comparative genomics. Then you are more focused on comparing the genomes, but with, of course, then the positions of genes and other things as a relevant data there. And these have been sort of quite operating in parallel, but basically the data is similar, and we're trying to focus on both these groups. Next slide, please. So the aim is to harmonize data that's been generated across a number of projects, and in total costing billions to produce this data set. They all end up with typically some data portal, metadata in a particular format with some APIs, but they're all different, and it's very difficult for users to extract data from all of these and search and analyze them, and specifically for AI use and so on. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these other projects were mostly biomedical, and there's a number of biodiversity projects being generated now, which is generating sequences for a number of species across the planet. Okay, so next slide, please. Before I go on to the sort of working group plans, I have a bit of a detour. So personally, I come from computer science. That's where I started, and I got into bioinformatics because I had a specialization which was mainly algorithms. That was my focus, but then bioinformatics sort of on the side. And then this is a slight book recommendation, but the focus of me personally, but also the working group is very much on the pragmatics. There's a book that I was handed when I started working, which is called The Pragmatic Programmer, which I recommend for everybody who's doing programming. Very much focused on use case driven, test driven development, making sure that what you're delivering is according to needs, and trying to build end-to-end systems in small steps. And yeah, next slide, please. So I am quite new to RDA. With what I encountered after a couple of meetings is another very completely different world, the semantic web, and lots of different concepts that's building together to solve this huge problem, which is fair data. And to me, that is an approach which doesn't really fit with my background and the focus of a working group. And I think that also is the case for the other co-chairs. Next slide, please. And I think in the basics of the issue is related to data models. And there's some strange things here, and it doesn't matter. So basically, there are 3 types of data models, and the focus I meet in RDA is very much on the graph model, where you have RDF and semantic web. But all our data, all our metadata that we're working with is either relational, tabular, or sort of JSON and REST APIs. And that's where the researchers are working. And there's a sort of, to me, it seems like a bit of a disconnect, which is hard to bridge. So for our working group, we will focus very much on the top layer here. Next slide, please. So an overview of what we are trying to do. So basically, there is metadata according to different models or not, and we would like to build some transformation pipelines or guidelines for how to do that in a maintainable way, and harmonize this into a minimal schema, which we are defining now. And the idea of this is that this will make the data available in public repositories for use. So next slide, please. And then we want to enable third-party services to harvest the data and figure out a uniform search API so that the users can still have a single point of entry. So this is very much an end-to-end solution. We're trying to make a solution that is fitting to the user's needs. Next slide, please. So these are the co-chairs. We are meeting. Yeah, I think you have a slightly old version. I just edited. So we're meeting every first and third Tuesday of each month. Yeah, next slide, please. Oh, okay. There was a slide I was going to show, which is not there. Okay, so I don't know what happened. So basically, I can mention. So we got funding from RDA to engage an external expert, which have been using in a project called the Elixir Biohackathon, where we had a project on engaging biodiversity community, and that was a great success. So yeah. Okay, thanks. I think that's what I had.
Thank you. Thank you, Sveinung, and thank you all for presenters. What we'll do now, before we open the floor for questions, is that we have a question to all of you. And the question is, did the work presented today respond to any challenges you face in your work? And if yes, how? And we would kindly ask you to go to Menti, where you can answer that question. Because I think we've seen quite practical work from 4 different disciplinary communities. And it would be quite interesting to see how you in the audience, but also co-chairs presenting, relate to the work that you heard about, and how you can see using that work going forward. So I will stop sharing my screen so that Genevieve could pull up the Menti. And I will also put the Menti.
So can you all see my screen? Yeah. Great. Some results coming in there.
So we see quite a focus on collaboration, which is good because this is one of the goals of this cross-fertilization webinars, is also to encourage and bring about new collaborations or strengthen existing ones. And more time for discussion. We're hearing you and getting there in a second. There's also very active discussion going on in the chat that I just noticed now because I was sharing my screen up until now. Yes, in particular, the work towards harmonized minimal metadata schema in any field is important. How do we come up with joint ways of achieving this? I think this might be a good place to start the discussion from, actually. So perhaps we'll leave the Menti up so that those of you who are still typing or wish to contribute can do it. But also open the floor for any questions or discussion. And I would open it exactly with this question. So it's the box in the middle of the screen. And it relates to a question that I had when I listened to the four speakers. Was we all know how important community-based standards are. But then what I was thinking was, is there a danger of retreating into, your own community, and what does it mean for interoperability in the broader picture? So there's a balance perhaps to be hit, and I wondered if the four speakers or anybody else in the audience has any reactions to that.
I have a small thought.
Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
One thing, I'm actually glad there are some of the other working groups on here because I hadn't gotten it. Usually in the plenaries, we're always overlapped. You can't always connect always. So a unique thing I think about some of these working groups is we all use the same technologies in many of them. And so technologies and subject investigations are different, right? You could be in health or environmental, but use the same instrument, which produces similar data types. So there's a lot of complementary reporting guidelines already that exist across different subject matter experts using the same technologies. So within some of these working groups, there are connections there where we're after collecting some of the same standard requirements that experts are aware about. And so I think it's nice to see what everyone is doing as well, because then it almost is kind of a return on investment and saves time in other working groups by working together. And so I think it's mostly having those discussions that help harmonize that knowledge that exists and then moving from there. So.
It's a very good point about same instruments being used for different purposes and how to take that into consideration. Gerhard, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. For me, it's I mean, maybe relating to our working group, the big question is between the very high level data annotation, so with DCAT, schema.org, maybe, and what makes, and a lot of people obviously don't know that, and we need better profiles for that. On the other hand, the other thing that makes sense to the practitioners is metadata that are really detailed. Yeah. So they work on a specific instrument, and there are metadata for that instrument. and there's always this huge gap in the middle, right? So you could either say, oh, this is a data set, about something, or you can say, I used the micro electron microscopy, so and so with these metadata, and in between it's kind of lost, right? And I'm not sure whether that's just for me and for material science, or whether that's just a general thing. That we always lose the connection somewhere in the middle, right? That makes it hard to really I mean, okay, there's linked open data and so on. I mean, there are things in the middle, but certainly in materials, it doesn't feature in linked open data. Yeah, it's not even existence as a domain, despite the fact that everything we do depends on materials. But also maybe it's in other areas as well that this middle bit is missing, and that's where I'm looking for ideas and collaborations.
Sveinung, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, I very much agree with that observation, and that is, I think, this is for our work group. That's sort of exactly the gap that we're trying to breach, focusing on the use cases and the needs directly from the researcher. What is a useful middle area, or the metadata standard for this in the middle of this gap? What's lacking? And I think the one problem is that if we are always going to make sure that everything that we're doing is following all the recommendations of linked data and semantic web and connecting to all the existing concepts, it's very hard to get to a working system. So at least my focus is to try to get something working, and then we can improve on that later, more than building the perfect solution in straight away.
There's that pragmatism coming into play.
Yes.
Sarah, and then Maggie.
Yeah, I suppose the problem we have, so we are a load of wind energy experts. We don't really know anything about, as I said before, we're not really experts on data sharing or data or metadata or technologies or anything. And what I'm really like to try to work out is how to attract say FAIR data experts to use their tools or models for our application. Like how maybe just I'd be interested in hearing your experiences of how to do that. Like, are you in your working group or the working groups where you have applications? So I think material science one was a particular application. Like, do you just have material sciences domain experts, or how do you interact with the non-domain experts? And like just any ideas or shared experiences on that would be very useful for us.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave time for the other co-chairs to think about it and turn to Maggie for her question.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to make a little bit of an observation. So at my university here in Lund, Sweden, I together with some colleagues, I teach a course for young PhD students or beginning PhD students at the faculties of science and technology. And there we're trying to tell them about metadata, about FAIR, open, and all of these things. And we have some exercises in which they get to look at some data sets from the web and sort of criticize or analyze them critically in terms of how are they described? Can I understand what's inside of these data? Could I use this if I wanted to, etc.? And they are very quick and to react to, yeah, but it doesn't say exactly which chemical was used or which instrument was applied or blah, blah, blah. So they can identify problems very quickly in other people's data. But then we ask them, so how would you go about describing your data now so that they become nicely documented? And then it's like, yeah, but I don't want to do that. And my boss told me that this is not important really. And we'll just do like we always did and use free text if we ever add any kind of descriptions to what the variables are in our tabular files, etc. So I mean, that's really my pet peeve. How can we get the actual senior scientists who are leading the research activities to start getting interested in this, to apply it, to test it, to use even basic documentation, let alone really applying standards and semantic artifacts and all of these things? I see that as a huge stumbling block here. Any comments or ideas about that from the group today or later on would be really interesting to me.
I have two about that.
Lots of hands going up. Let me see. I have Sveinung first, then I have Allison, Lindsay, and then Stefano.
Yeah, so that's a major issue. Obviously, I think we all understand that. And I don't have any real solutions, but just I noticed when you described this is that the seniors in your example, they were actually sort of hindering people to do what they believed probably they should be doing, but they didn't have the resources to do. So I mean, one place to start is to not stop people from doing what they should.
Allison?
I've really enjoyed all these calls. I have to say this is probably the most cross-fertilization of any cross-fertilization talk I've been to at the RDA, so thank you very much for that. In the chat, I did point to the OS Trails project, which I am, full disclosure, part of. And I just wanted to say that all of these concerns that people have around actually using FAIR assessment tools are really important, and that some of the stuff that we're trying to address there will hopefully help. Of course, that's not going to help you tomorrow because it's a grant that runs for 2 or 3 years. But Lindsay, for example, and their working group have come to us saying they'd like to be a use case. And if anybody else, as I've talked with some in the chat, would like to do that as well, then we'd be very happy to make sure that the sorts of ways you'd like to interact with FAIR assessment tools are captured. Right now, we're building specifications for how tools that align with, FAIR assessment tools that align with our structures and frameworks would all sort of run their tests in the same way. And a lot of this is around the machine tests, but someone in the chat also mentioned the human tests, the checklists and things like that. And that's also a very interesting area, but hopefully this will help make these programmatic tests more understandable. And not only that, there's going to be the option to create community-specific benchmarks for the tests. So part of the outputs of this is that you'll be able to, as a community, whether you're the WIN community or the Multi-Omics community, say, for us, these are the sorts of metrics and tests that are important for our community. I'm not interested in ARCs, but I am interested in DOIs for identification, for example, on things like this, and build up the shape of FAIR assessment for your community in a sort of standardized way. So I'll stop talking now, but it's just to say that it's a really interesting area. And if you're at all interested in being a use case or submitting a use case about, then please do just email me. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. Lindsay?
Yeah, there was 2 things I wanted to touch on. One, to touch on, I think, something Sarah had mentioned. One thing in our working group is it's such a diverse set of experts. So typically in our world, genomics experts don't sit down and talk with proteomics or metabolomics experts. So one thing we had to make sure that we did in the beginning is we had to have representative experts who were in external consortiums and working groups developing these really well-known standards. So like for us, HUPO, Genomic, GSC, like a lot of those types of experts who have developed these that the journals and databases employ. So, and a lot of them are very busy, right? So sometimes we have to make sure we we meet one-on-one to make sure that those standards are being represented as they're being developed. But then two, we have a cross set of experts who were experts in their own fields, whether it's data management, whether it's FAIR, whether it's a few other types of different semantic interoperability applications. So our working group is really diverse, and that was something we had to kind of headhunt. It definitely didn't come right away. So that in and of itself is how we've been able to do a lot of the curation. So that is kind of an essential part. And then the other one is, I think something we can do now is applying FAIR metrics is challenging, because I think right now what we notice after the plenary, even our working group, is that we need to have discussions with journals and databases because the requirements are out of date. So already right now, we don't have enough metadata reporting as is. So I think in the domain communities, if we can assemble what we know we need and we know what the experts are using and creating, then I think creating new conversations with FAIR metric or FAIR assessment experts to work together in a multidisciplinary setting is how that sort of can come into fruition. And so that is something we've been discussing a lot, like Alison had mentioned, is kind of, how do we integrate and have conversations where conversations don't currently exist? That's helpful to know. It's been challenging, by the way. It's not easy.
Thank you, and thank you also for bringing other stakeholders in this into the conversation. Stefano had his hand up, but pointed out that he cannot speak because in a very loud environment. So he put his comment into the chat, saying that in response to Maggie's comment that they have the same problems and concerns. To my experience, two strategies can be very effective. First, working with policymakers to embed those criteria into research product requirement. And second, pointing at the value of research product visibility, quality and tidiness, including metadata. So concerns shared by many. Unfortunately, Mark had to leave, and in fact, we are at 11:30. So it's passed quickly. Time passes fast when you're having fun, as they say. Thank you to all the speakers and all the participants for being here today. We will share the recording.
Sorry to
Yes,
interrupt,
Alison,
Maggie's comment is really timely, and I just didn't want it to get lost before we moved past it. Maggie says, would it be possible for a Tiger to arrange a webinar specifically about FAIR assessment? And I think that would be super. That's all I want to say.
We can most definitely take it into planning, no problem. So I just wanted to say that chat has been very lively, and I see a lot of good conversations in there. So we'll make sure to record the chat, record your Menti responses together with obviously the recording itself. And also some reporting about the key themes that came out of those webinars afterwards, as mentioned at the top of the webinar. So thank you all for being here. The third cross-fertilization webinar will be on December 18th. Genevieve, can you confirm that?
Yeah, that's correct. We haven't quite confirmed the time yet. It's looking like it's going to be 1 p.m. UTC, but there'll be confirmation of that within the next day or two, and you'll find it on the events section of the RDA website.
So see you all another time, the last time for the series, right before we kick off the holiday period. And thank you again for being here, and looking forward to seeing all of you in some occasion or another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.